So now with the drum rhythms established, we can add in some simple percussion to help accent everything. As mentioned previously, the rhythmic patterns in synthwave are usually quite simple. Some synthwave tracks just rely on kicks and snare drums to drive the whole drum section. Some tracks don't even necessarily have hi-hats. But for this track, I wanted to show you basically all the different elements that could be present in a synthwave track, depending on what kind of style you're going for, so I decided to add in some hi-hats. These will be used in the main chorus section to kind of help drive things along a little bit more. So for synthwave, you want to stay away from overly digital sounding percussion, or sounds you would find in something like an 808 drum machine, these kind of synthesized, tight hi-hat sounds. Instead, the type of hi-hats you're looking for are going to be from classic drum machines like the Lindrum LM1 or the Oberheim DMX. The overall characteristic of these hi-hats is going to be similar to an acoustic sound, but it's going to be a little bit more synthetic and sound like it was sampled rather than played by a live drummer. So it's going to kind of sound like a one-shot synthesized hi-hat sound that's being played repeatedly. It'll kind of give you this interesting static quality that'll make it sound kind of cool. And this is also characteristic of a lot of 80s pop songs as well. They used drum machines as their main drummer. So we'll be using the UVI Beatbox Anthology 2 again, but you can always just Google the name of these drum machines if you're looking for something similar. So let's just duplicate our snare layer. We'll rename that to hats. We can delete the MIDI clips here. And then we can go ahead and open this up. We'll be using the samples from the Lindrum LM1. So we'll go over to hi-hat number 1. And we'll swap that over to the LM1. That's this LM1 drum machine. We have a bunch of different options here, but let's go ahead and go all the way up to the top. And then we are looking for the Lindrum 1 hi-hat P0D2, which on its own just sounds like this. So it's this kind of crunchy hi-hat sound. Let's also make sure there's no pan on that as well. So this is a great example of what you're looking for. It has a synthesized quality to it, but it also sounds like it's an acoustic sample as well. So it's kind of a weird hybrid right in between both those two sounds. Now I also went ahead and just cut out some of the low frequencies below like 130 or so, just so there's no sub bass hanging out in the hi-hat sample. And then let's go over to the tune control and adjust that to an amount of 1.5. This will just pitch shift the hi-hat so it matches kind of musically with what's happening with the other snare drum and kick drum samples. So feel free to go in and repitch this based on the samples you're using. That'll kind of help it blend a little bit better with the different drum elements that you're using inside your track. A lot of these vintage drum machines also had the ability to change the pitch of the kick drums, the snares, the hi-hat samples, and things like that. So it enabled you to kind of tune the individual drum samples to the track that you're working on. And if you don't have the UVI Beatbox library, just Google Lindrum LM1 samples, and there are tons of free hi-hat samples and kick drums and snares people have sampled from their own personal machines that they've uploaded onto the internet. So you can always do that if you don't have this drum library. And then from there, we can move on to the open hi-hat, or just hi-hat number 2. Let's change that over to 0 on the pan. So that way it's not panning back and forth. Now we're looking for an open hi-hat sound. So let's go ahead and go back over to our Lindrum LM1. So that way the two hi-hat samples kind of match each other because they'll be from the same drum machine. And we are looking for the hi-hat P6. So go down to P6. And then we are looking for sample D5, which just sounds like this. So it's this nice open hi-hat sound. We can take that distortion, turn that down, just so there's no distortion on the open hi-hat. And then I want to go ahead and drop the tune control down to -5. Which has two interesting effects. The first of which is it's going to extend the length of the sample because it's pitch shifted it downwards. And the other thing that this is going to do is help it blend in with the snare drum. So every other time the snare drum hits, we'll have this open hi-hat sound hitting. And we'll want to make sure that the pitch of those two sounds matches. I just did this by ear, so you can always go in and adjust this accordingly if you have a different snare sample. So those are the two samples. We have the closed and the open hi-hat. And then from there, we can go ahead and create a 2-bar MIDI clip. So let's just do that here. Go ahead and select that, do Command-Shift-M. This will give us a new MIDI clip to work with. And then we can also change this over to 1/16. So we have 16th notes as our grid. And now let's go down to the first octave because that's where the one-shot drums are on this drum sampler. The first note is going to be F sharp. in the first octave. And that'll be the closed hat, which I'll just go ahead and solo out actually. So that's what that sounds like in context. So that is that sample. And then the second sample is going to be on G sharp number 1, and that's the open hi-hat. So for this, we're going to be creating a super simple drum loop that has a very driving feel to it, which just means that the notes are going to hit evenly. They're not going to be swung or played in a shuffled pattern, so everything will be hitting on the downbeats and not having that natural swing that an actual drummer would have if they were playing this part. This sort of driving, marching characteristic is something that I'll mention throughout this course because it's very characteristic of synthwave tracks and helps make your patterns feel like they're musically going somewhere. So the pattern we'll have is just 4 closed hi-hats, the open hat, and then the closed ones again. And you don't want to layer these two on top of one another at the same time because that's not how an acoustic drum set would work. You could either play the open hi-hat or the closed hi-hat. Make sure to not have them play at the same time. And that just sounds like this. So pretty simple pattern. We can go ahead and just repeat that several different times. And that just sounds like this. Another popular hi-hat pattern for synthwave, and also a lot of 80s tracks as well, is to have the open hi-hat on the first downbeat. So let me show you what that would sound like. That would be this pattern right here. So it's basically just the opposite. But for this one, I want to go ahead and have the open hat happen whenever we have the snare drum. So in context to everything, it sounds like this. So it has this very marching characteristic to it, which when combined with the stab synths and all the different chord elements we'll be creating later, will have this really interesting musical effect. While in a normal song, this drum pattern would be way too simple, it's going to sound great inside of our synthwave track because it's going to make the overall rhythm of the song feel like it's marching along and going somewhere musically. Let's go ahead and just add in one effect to this, which is just going to be an EQ8, just to clean up some of those low frequencies. You turn off the other bands here because we just need that low frequency cut. And we'll have that cut at 140. And that sounds like this. Let's just cutting out some of those low end bass frequencies that we don't need inside of our hi-hats. The other thing I want to do is just go over to the mixer and make sure that volume is turned down just a little bit here. So that way those hi-hats aren't too up in front of our mix. We'll be tweaking everything a bit later, but that'll get us kind of generally where we need to be. Now we'll copy that over 4 different times. So that way we have an 8-bar long drum pattern in total. So altogether, those drums sound like this. So in the next video, we'll be creating a heavy gated reverb that will be applied to the snare drum, the hi-hat pattern, and also the tom drums as well. By applying this gated reverb to the hi-hats, it's going to give us this interesting tone on the open hi-hats whenever we have one of these snare drums hit. And I'll be showing you what that sounds like and how to set everything up inside the next video.